This is High Carb and Low Carb, a science fair project by Siena, Southall and Ophelia, Delaney. What this project is about. In this project, we'll be testing our blood sugar levels after eating a high carb and a low carb piece of food to prove that low carb food is better for you, better on your blood sugar levels than a high carb food is. We'll also be comparing blood sugar levels between a type 1 diabetic and a non-type 1 diabetic to prove that blood sugar levels fluctuate more than a person with type 1 diabetes compared to a person that does not have diabetes. We'll be testing these theories by the both of us eating certain foods and then testing our blood sugar levels at certain times after eating the same food. We'll be able to complete the testing between both of us, as Sienna is a type 1 diabetic and Ophelia is a non-diabetic.
What is type 1 diabetes? If you want to understand what our whole project is going to be about, you need to know what type 1 diabetes is. Well, diabetes is an autoimmune disease that attacks your pancreas and stops it from producing insulin and no longer is able to control my blood sugar levels on its own, like many other people's does. So, it means I have to do it manually, as non-diabetics' pancreases can do it on their own, without you knowing, like it will control your blood sugar levels by itself and will give you more or less insulin as needed.
Our table of contents. We have our aim, a hypothesis, method, and variables testing results. Our aim is to show that high carb foods will push our blood sugar levels up more than low carb food. This is to prove that low carb food is better for your glucose levels than high carb food is. We're also doing this to prove that low carb food is better for your health. We are doing the testing to show what happens for a non-type 1 diabetic and a type 1 diabetic's blood sugar levels.
2. Hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that the high carb food will make our levels rise more, as the high carb food has more carbohydrates and sugars. We believe that low carb food will not make the levels spike as much because the low carb food has less carbohydrates and sugars in it. 3. Method and variables.
We're doing 6 tests to prove our theory with 3 different types of food. Bread, muffins, and biscuits. High carb and low carb, high carb and low carb, high carb and low carb. We'll be measuring our blood sugar levels for 3 hours a day. The first test will be we will do the first test of our blood sugar levels, what it was before eating the food. Then the next 2 tests will be happening after we eat the food. We prick our finger to then put the blood into a blood glucose meter, and it shows you the number of your level. You can go from 0 being the lowest, blacking out and having a coma, to 33.9 being the highest. First off, get the materials you need. You'll need blood strips, a finger pricker, blood glucose machine, and 2. You'll get the food you'll be doing your test with. 3. Test the levels before you eat the food, then record them. 4. Eat the food whilst doing your test. Set your timer to an hour. Once the timer goes off, test your levels and record. Repeat 3 times. Repeat the above steps for each food you're testing.
Variables. We think that if the food was different with the measurements, or more or less, it would increase the likelihood of our blood sugars increasing. Also, our levels are different every day. It can also depend on if my blood sugar levels are high, low, or perfect. The outcome of the results can overall change the results, ending in a different outcome as we planned. Low blood sugars, high blood sugar levels, measuring the difference of ingredients, and overall can be different every day. Our independent variables is we will be changing the amount of carbs and sugars. We will be using different food to demonstrate this. Dependent, how we will be observing, monitoring, and change in the glucose levels, and controlled. We will be keeping the same time span when it comes to testing.
What does high carb and low carb even mean? What does low carb mean though? Low carb food is made up of low amounts of flour and sugar. Some low carb foods are nuts, seeds, low carb baking, chicken, pork, and fish. What does high carb mean though? High carb food is food made up of high amounts of flour and sugar. Some high carb foods are donuts, potato, or corn chips, gummy, etc. Pros and cons of eating high carb. Pros of eating high carb: it's definitely more cheaper if you're on a low budget, and it's easier and quicker to obtain than what low carb is. Cons: eating high carb food is cheaper and faster, but it isn't good for your blood sugar levels, especially for type 1 diabetics, as it will push the levels up more than what low carb food will do. The pros and cons of eating low carb. Pros of eating the pros for type 1 diabetes is that it'll keep your levels better and more stable. It is overall healthier. But the cons are is eating low carb is more expensive. Eating low carb is more expensive, and it's not as easy to obtain as high carb food is.
The high carb food we're using is white bread, which is 17 carbs for each piece, high carb chocolate chip biscuits, 18 carbs for one, and homemade muffin, plain, 20 carbs for each muffin. The low carb food we're using is the same, but it is low carb white bread, which is 5 carbs per piece, low carb chocolate biscuits, which are 2 carbs each, and a homemade muffin, low carb. It's plain and it's 6 carbs each.
The materials you will need is a blood glucose meter, blood glucose test strips, lancing device, also known as a finger pricker, food, high carb and low carb food, a timer, a paper and pen for recording results, tissue to clean finger.
Testing and results. These are our results, and as you can see, the high carb muffins have pushed our levels up much more than what the low carb has. And you can probably read this out for yourself, as you can just see the numbers and see that the high carb stuff has risen our levels much more than what the low carb has.
These are the results. As you can see, the differences are very, very noticeable in them. The first tests in each row is Siena's ones, is Ophelia's ones, and the second tests in the row are Siena's ones. It's in exactly the same order. These are the low carb results. It's in exactly the same order, but there's much less of a difference. This is the ethnicities of people in New Zealand with diabetes. As you can see, all the results are pretty much close, but Māori and European have pretty much the similar amounts, with Asian people having the most percentage in New Zealand with diabetes.
At the start of this project, our aim was to find out if eating low carb food was better on a type 1 diabetic's blood sugar levels than eating high carb food. While carrying out the high carb food experience, we found that it also increased the non-diabetics blood sugar levels. While carrying out the low carb food experience, we have found that it kept the type 1 diabetics sugar more in range than what the low carb has. So, in conclusion, high carb food does increase blood sugar levels more than low carb food, and the low carb keeps your levels more in range. So, overall, it is benefiting you and your health for your type 1 diabetics. Thank you for listening to our science fair.